rotations. During those rotations, you're going to learn graft preparation, graft placement, and there will be customized learning stations. So this presentation will show you a little bit of what to look for when you're making grafts, when you're either slivering, dissecting, placing, and so on. Whenever, this is the standard, sliver has to be single row of follicular units. All units have to be intact, and at all time has to be hydrated. So to kind of help you develop the keen eye to good quality, I added some slides to have you think and tell me what's wrong with this sliver. So the follicular units are intact, so that's good. It looks moist, so that's good. The only thing that is not good is there's a 2-row of follicular units, so the sliver is too thick. So when there's a single row of follicular units, like here, it's easy to see between the spacing between the follicular units and dissect. And this one is hard, so it slows down the dissection. So slivers needs to be single row follicular units. So what's different between these two slivers? So the sliver on the left has intact follicular units. So everything is moist, as you see the shiny surface, but these are transected. So if you see there is this grouping, this grouping, this grouping, and this grouping, so it's about 5 groupings of hairs that were transected and completely damaged. So whenever transection happens, because these spacing between follicular units is very small, so when a transection happens, you have to know what movement of the blade caused that. Whether it's in slivering or harvesting, you need to kind of start thinking, what did I do with my blade to transect? So, and then the other thing is there are 2 different types of transection. There's a transection here where if you follow this one behind, there's a full length hair shaft. This has only tops, this one has only bottoms. Can you see the difference? So what happens is usually the blade needs to be parallel to the hair shaft. So if blade is parallel to the hair shaft, then you follow the path in between and the follicular unit stays intact. In this particular case, if you see the transection on the top, that means the blade came toward the hair shaft and cut it. So the person that's slivering realized, oh, I transected here and overcorrected and transected on the other side. So that's why you see this type of transection. This is missing, tops are missing, and here the bottoms are missing. When we look at the grafts, we always, anytime we're looking at tissue, we're looking to be hydrated. So intact follicular units and hydrated, trimmed properly and sorted properly. What the study, probably you already learned this, that the study showed that if I look at the full hair length, there is regenerative cells around the bulge and regenerative cells around the bulb. So these 2 types of regenerative cells have to be present for the hair follicle to regenerate. So the top third could be viable, but it may regrow hair that is a weaker caliber. The top 2/3 can be viable. So top 2/3, bottom 2/3 can be viable, and it can regrow hair. The disadvantage between this graft and this graft is that if I place this one in a site, it may slide in, and I may not see that I placed the graft, and I can place another graft on top of it. So the objective is to keep the grafts intact at the full length. If you have top third, it may regrow. If you have a bottom third, top 2/3, I'm sorry. Top 2/3, it may regrow. The bottom 2/3, it may regrow, but they're not ideal grafts. Half top, half bottom does not grow. Top third and top, my numbers are messed up today. I'm sorry for that. Top half, bottom half, no. Top third, bottom third, no. So the 2/3 may, but the ideal is full length. So how many viable hair shafts, hair follicles do we have in these 5 grafts? Anyone wants to guess? How many? Call it out, I can't see you. 3? Actually, it's only 2. So this one is, so what I do is I take the graft and look at the full length of the hair follicle. And that's my measurement. So this is half of that, bottom will not survive. This is just a piece, a middle third would not survive. This is the bottom third, will not survive. These 2 are top halves, will not survive. This is a bottom fifth, will not survive. There's a 1 here behind that will survive. There's a 1 here that will survive. This is top third, 2 top thirds, nothing, and a half, nothing. So grafts have to be intact and clean. So here, it may be hard for you to notice, but the idea is that you're looking at the shine, the grafts need to be shine. When they become dull, like this one, it's almost like, looks like there's a fibers on it, indicates drying of the graft. So they have to be always, you have to see a little bit of fluid around them. See, there's no fluid here, indicates the drying of the graft. It takes 3 minutes for the graft to dry and die. What's wrong with this? So there are intact follicular units, and there is a 1 hair here, there are 3 hairs here, there are 2 hair here, right? So are these good grafts or not? So the tricky thing about this is they have intact follicular units, they're hydrated. However, their size is equal for the different numbers of grafts. Unless you use one size site and fit everything in one size site, these grafts would work. But most of you will not. So if you're using a smaller site for 1 hairs, that graft needs to be trimmed to fit your site. The same thing. So if you look here, they're all the same size, but actually they have to be trimmed closely to the follicular unit in order to fit in a site that you create. What's wrong with this? If you notice how much pressure is created in grasping, it can cause capping, and sometimes if it's a little bit below, this is where the sebaceous gland and bulge are. If the same pressure was created there, it can damage the graft. Oftentimes what we want to do is distribute the tension on a graft within 2 forceps, unless they come out very easily. What's wrong with this? These are FUE grafts. So some people believe they don't need to be trimmed. This is a transected hair. These are viable hairs. This is a viable hair, but they're too transected. So they could be placed, and most likely these will not grow, but they become a foreign object. So the body has to fight it. Sometimes it can cause inclusion cysts. So it would be ideal to clean those grafts. So you want to clean anything that is transected and just leave, so it's easier. There's no confusion how many hairs are on the top. So if someone places this graft in a hairline, the person placing would say, oh, I know there's only 1 bulb underneath, but someone checking, looking on the top would say, wait a minute, there's 2 or 3 hairs on the top. So it minimizes confusion, it's clean and clear for everybody. In graft placements, once again, we're looking at the hydration, we're looking at the way that you grasp the graft, the depth of the insertion, the direction of the curl, and the location of the graft. This is one of the methods in the past where you would take a little bit of telfa, hydrate a telfa, put the grafts on a telfa. But what's wrong with this picture is this person spread out all the grafts on a telfa, and while the person is placing, they're slightly drying all around. So the grafts need to be kept, whether it's during dissection, slivering, extraction, placement, they have to be hydrated, and within 3 minutes at least spray with your solution of choice. This is a damage. So the damage to hair follicle can happen either with cutting, which is a transection with your blade, or with a trauma caused by forceps. But this is interesting. This is a trauma caused by blade. Sometimes when we dissect tissue, there's a fragment of hair that will get on a graft. So we want to clean the fragment of hair. Scraping the blade on the graft causes this. And this came from the damage done with the forceps when the forceps was, when the grafts were held, was squeezed, so the damage happened to the hair follicle. What's wrong with this? So someone in this graft specifically has a lot of fat, but if you take a FUE graft, everybody is afraid to touch the denuded follicle. So what they do is they take the graft high to protect the hair follicle, but what happens is that graft gets forced in. It bends where you insert the forceps, and then that's a wasted graft and a wasted work. On this picture, I tried to make it as clear as possible, but I'm going to point it out so you can see what I'm showing you is whenever we place grafts, we want to keep it maybe 0.5 to 1 millimeter elevated so you can see where the grafts were placed. This is different than that, and this is different than that. So I'm going to go forward and I'm going to show you. One was too shallow, so it needed to be pulled out. This one was too high, it needs to be pushed in. So I'm going to go back to this one to show you. Oh, wrong way. I just want to show you. If you see, this is the top of the graft. There's a skin surface. It's almost a half sticking out. Can you see that? And so the other thing, I'm missing the top here. It indicates that the graft slid in. And if this heals like this, it may cause spitting, unnatural healing, or unnatural results. And if this dries like this, the graft may dry and not survive. These are FUE grafts. Within a circle, I pointed out a graft that is a little bit different. Is it the graft at 12 o'clock or 6 o'clock that is different? 6 o'clock, right? So if you look at the surrounding epidermal caps, they're all facing, they're flush with the skin. This one is sticking up. So when you look at the way your grafts sit at the surface of the skin, it should look like, when I say flush, it should be almost in the same plane. And then when there's something sticking, that tells you that the hair curl is pointing in a different opposite direction. Sometimes we have grafts, this is, once again, it may be hard to see, so I'm going to show you this. Sometimes we have grafts, they have a different length hair follicles. So there will be, let's say, 3 hair grafts. These 2 are going to be longer, one is going to be shorter. Inserting them in, if we don't pay attention to the shorter follicle, it ends up being outside of the site. So the placement has to happen where the longer follicles inserted, and then when we arrive to the shorter, that has to be tucked in. Otherwise, out of 3 hairs, this one is not surviving, or maybe 2, that one is not surviving. Is this graft too high or too low? Too high, right? But there's something else here that I'm trying to show you is, sometimes where we make sites within the hairs, the physician making site can accidentally transect existing hair, and there's a little hair sticking out of beside the site. But in this case, this is not a hair sticking out beside the site. That means someone placed the graft inside of the site, graft slid in, and then a small hair was sticking out. The person didn't see that hair, so the hair came at the end of the site like this, and the site in the front of that hair appeared empty. So the second graft was placed on the top. So you have to be very careful, constantly surveying the area of placement to start noticing, is this site filled? Is this graft at the proper length? Do I see hairs around the site? And then I pull the hair to see whether there's a graft inside. Patient came to see us, and someone did a hair transplant not long ago, and he kept complaining that I can't style my hair, something is wrong with my results, but he couldn't articulate what was wrong, and he kept his hair short. What was wrong is that the hair curls were pointing in whichever direction, So this is why he couldn't style hair. So not only that the hair didn't point toward the scalp, it was pointing left, right, up, and everywhere. So it was very hard to style. So you have to pay attention to the hair curl, and it has to point toward the scalp. Graft to size fit. You probably already heard this, that whenever you are making recipient sites, your grafts should fit the site, and the site should fit the graft. So this is why we trim the grafts to fit the site, and then we adjust the site to the size of the graft. So, and then the location is important. This is a hairline, and usually hairline would have one hair graft. So these are one hair grafts, but this does not look like that. So, you see the difference? So these are one hair grafts. They're so tiny that you can barely see the top of the graft, but these are much bigger grafts that they are placed way too close to the hairline. So either they were not trimmed, and this looks more like a 2-hair graft. This may be a 1-hair graft, but wasn't trimmed. So it is important, once again, to create the size of the graft to fit the site, but also to make sure the graft is placed in a proper location. These two grafts, do you think they're the same or they're different? Who would say they're the same? How many of you think they're the same? Okay. They're actually different. So this graft here has a telogen hair. This one has a transected hair. So we all agree that this hair shaft is intact. This has there's a cuff of tissue around it, and there's a blurry end. So the hair is viable, and if you look at the top, you can see like a little fork, tells you there are 2 hairs there. This hair was transected. You can see a clear cut. So this should be trimmed and considered as a 1 hair. This should be kept as a 2 hair. If this is not sorted properly, then the type of the grafts with a telogen hair or not sorted properly will end up in a hairline, and it would look like these tufts of hair. So you can say I put smaller grafts in a hairline, but it'll look pluggy. So you have to make sure that it's not that 1 hair is a truly 1 hair. And at the end, I just want to say that magnification is very important, because if you know what to look for, that's the key number 1. But second is you have to be able to see the subtleties, and they're 1/5, 1/8 of the millimeter difference, whether the size of grafts, and so you have to be having a proper magnification to allow that.